why the delay? These people are really smart. They've been thinking about these things for their whole lives. They have degrees in these things, and they are, some of them, like you've mentioned here, are just beginning to see that the things that they value have no grounding in their worldview, but they have a grounding in the Christian worldview. I was just talking this weekend about the problem of evil, and how the problem of evil makes sense in Christianity. At least it makes sense in our worldview. It belongs in our worldview. It's part of our story, and our story's not over yet. The atheists can't even make sense of the problem of objective evil, which is people have complained about. I just have always wondered why don't they see that? Why don't they see that all of the things they're advancing and they're expressing as values in conversation, and the great paragraph from God Delusion, how Dawkins is railing against the God of the Bible. It's a very well written paragraph. You could put it to music. I think it's great, but it's not at home in a world in which there's no good, no evil, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference, which is another one of Dawkins's citations. So, do you have any sense of why did it take some of these people so long to figure this out?
I think there's a number of reasons. I think sometimes people don't want to see what is often right in front of them, because it does make a claim on your life. That there's an implication. It's not just assenting intellectually to something. If you say God exists, and especially if you say Jesus Christ, was God in the flesh, there's going to be all kinds of implications for that. So I can understand why some people want to kind of hold that off at arm's length as long as possible. I mean, the other aspect of it, though, is I think often the fact that so many people in the West take the idea of human rights, for example, absolutely for granted. They have just been brought up assuming this is completely natural. This is just the way any civilized society functions and thinks. As one of my friends who's written a book on this subject, Glenn Scrivener, calls it, he calls his book The Air We Breathe. It is like the air we breathe. We don't notice it because we're so steeped in it. The way that another friend of mine, Tom Holland, puts it, who's a secular historian, but wrote this fantastic book called Dominion, which really looked at the way the Christian Revolution has completely shaped the moral instincts of the West. He says we're like goldfish in a bowl. We don't even think about the water we're swimming in, but the waters we're swimming in are in fact Christian waters. And I think the reason why just now, just at this moment, some of these intellectuals are starting to wake up to the fact that actually it's Christian waters we've been swimming in this whole time is because suddenly the foundations of their own moral structure are being challenged. I think they're starting to realize, it turns out that not everyone has the same idea as me about the nature of reality, about physical biology, about, why some things are right and why some things are wrong. And I think that has led some of them to start to realize this kind of Western, the Western values that we hold so dear are not necessarily just the product of common sense and, reason and science. And so I'll give you the example here of Tom Holland, the historian I mentioned, who's a very popular podcaster here in the UK, has written this best-selling book, but I've had him on the show several times now for conversations. And he essentially grew up with a very secular mindset, went to university, studied history at Oxford University, went on to start writing very popular historical works on the Greeks and the Romans. But what he said to me was, he said, the more that I got into the mindset of the Greeks and the Romans, I realized how very alien their world was to my own. This was a world where slavery was just an absolutely accepted part of the economy, where some people could be the sexual property of others, where the lives of women and children were cheap, where, a Roman emperor would parade through the streets of Rome boasting of killing and enslaving 1 million Gauls. He said, this world was so alien to me. I suddenly realized, well, why do I believe in freedom, equality, dignity? And he realized it's not because of the Greeks and the Romans. It's not because of science and reason. It's because of this man, Jesus of Nazareth. The movement he began is what gave me my moral instincts today. And he ended up saying, I realize that in almost every way, I am in fact a Christian, Justin.
Yeah.
And so when someone like Tom Holland goes on that intellectual journey, suddenly I think it starts to niggle away, and he himself has now openly kind of critiquing his secular peers and saying, look, just face up to it. Your belief in human rights is a theological belief. It doesn't come from science or reason or, ancient Greece. It comes from Christian assumptions about us being made in the image of God. And so it's so interesting to hear them say that. Now, in Tom Holland's case, I think he has been edging towards Christian faith. He's that's very much hit him at a personal level. I think others are still sort of somehow managing to hold it out as a sort of an abstract thing, that it's a kind of almost a useful fiction, if you like, that's helpful, but I don't have to accept that it actually has any supernatural implications. So I think it does depend on the individual as to what they're willing to accept in the end when it comes to these ideas.
I have a lot of thoughts here as you're talking, Justin, and even the concept of useful fiction. Well, in these kinds of things, they're not useful if they're fictions. They're just they are just fictions. That maybe you subjectively happen to like. I don't know, because if we have a deep belief in human rights and our deep belief entails that these aren't really real, we're just playing at a game, this undermines the force of human rights, of course. And this gets to a point, and you made this, and I want to draw attention to it because I talk about it a lot, and I want people to see the distinction. That the way you put it is that they're realizing that these kinds of things do not come from reason. And that's the source. Reason may be a way we know these things, just like a stop sign is the way we know that we ought to stop. But that's not what gives the stop sign its authority. It's a governing authority that the stop sign comes from. And this is the distinction that's really important. People say, well, where do you get morality? And they say, oh, it's just common sense. Well, wait a minute, that wasn't the question. The question isn't how do you know it. The question is, where did it come from? And that's the key thing that gives morality its force.